Welcome to the Neophyte in the Woods podcast with Andrew McDowell.
Welcome to another episode of the Neophyte in the Woods podcast. I'm your host, Andrew McDowell. We remain proud members of the Change Your POV podcast network. I'm just going to warn everybody up front, there's going to be math and practical shooting gamer content herein. So if you find those objectionable, thank you for downloading and listening. You're going to want to listen to something else. Having said that, you've been warned, so let's get into it. This week, as the title of this episode would indicate, we're going to talk about how the game of USPSA is scored and some of the terms and math around it and some of the ways that you can gain a competitive advantage within the rules of the game are going to be discussed as well. At its most basic level, USPSA and IPSC use a time-based abstraction to measure how well, quote unquote, shooters do on a given stage. In its most simple terms, the shorter the time it takes you to complete a stage, the better you do. It's kind of like golf with guns, if you will. In golf, obviously, the fewer strokes you take to get the ball in the hole, the better your score. To build on that a little bit, there's a few concepts that I've mentioned in previous episodes that you'll need to fully understand to really comprehend how USPSA is scored. The first is, for lack of a better term, zones on a target. In USPSA, there's two kinds, metric and classic targets. A metric is kind of a torso shaped with a head. It's the one that if you've looked at a target at a range or have done some not practical but tactical shooting, you'll be familiar with that outline. It's very similar to the IDPA target, just the zones are a little bit different. And then there's the classic target, which is more common in IPSC and especially overseas. It's a polygon. It doesn't bear any close resemblance to a human torso. It's designed to look a little bit less threatening, a little bit less like a person. On both of them, there are 4 zones. A, B, C, and D, or as we normally refer to them, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. Each zone has a pretty straightforward point value attached to it. For somebody shooting major, that is 165 power factor or above, Alpha gets you 5 points, Bravo 4, Charlie 4, Delta 2. For minor, it's 5, 3, 3, and 1 respectively. You'll notice that Bravo and Charlie have the same point value. It wouldn't surprise me if in the near future the two of them are merged and we end up having only 3 zones per target. That's the way it actually is on the classic target these days. They do away with one of the duplicative scored zones and simplify the target a little bit. The higher values on these targets are the ones that are associated with being closer to center of mass. So if you were shooting defensively, they're the zones that are going to more quickly exsanguinate your combative target. So in practical shooting, the closer you are to center mass, the more points you get. The exception being the head zone on the metric target. The head is 2 zones. It has alpha, which is kind of the eye box, if you think about it, and bravo's everything else. It's a zone that you will have to shoot at pretty frequently, so practicing there is a good way to do it. And if you're like me and you track rounds up, sometimes you can get a surprise bravo or a surprise alpha instead of a mic or a miss on those. So it's a nice little treat. Missing or hitting a no-shoot target, no-shoots are normally going to be indicated by a white target, will get you twice the maximum score of the target down in points. For all intents and purposes, missing a target or hitting a no-shoot is going to get you 10 points down. One kind of tip here is if you're a casual or slower shooter and your accuracy is pretty good, but your speed is not, it's better to go at your steady, slower pace and avoid as many misses or mics or no-shoots as you possibly can. One of the axioms of USPSA is you can't miss fast enough to win. There are some circumstances where that's not true. I'm not good enough, or I haven't encountered them yet, but I know some people who do and will say you can't miss fast enough to win except for when you can. So that those basics out of the way, we can now start to talk about math. Hit factor, which is abbreviated as HF or in shorthand, is in essence just your points per second. Hit factor is calculated as your points minus any penalties divided by the time. For example, if a stage has 160 points available and you score 137 points with 20 points down, so you end up netting 100 and... Math is challenging this evening. You end up netting 127 points in... 117 points in 56 seconds. Your hit factor is going to be something like 2.634. It normally goes out to 3 or 4 digits. Another example would be is if you took 30 seconds to shoot a 60-point stage, you're going to have a hit factor of 2, right? So you're scoring 2 points per second. If somebody else took 10 seconds to earn those same 60 points, their hit factor is going to be 6 even. The next abstraction that we use in talking about how USPS is scored is what we call stage percentage. Basically, in simplest terms, the competitor with the highest hit factor gets 100% for that stage, and so on down. If somebody has a hit factor of 10 and you have a hit factor of 9, you're going to have a stage percentage of 90, and so on down. It's important to note that stage points for the shooter with 100% will always be the points available for the stage, just to keep the math a little bit simpler. Next up is what we're going to call the stage winner. It's the shooter with the highest hit factor, as I said before. All the other shooters are ranked below the stage winner in order of hit factor from top to bottom. So to get the stage percentage, your hit factor is divided by the highest hit factor for the stage in kind of simple terms. The total number of stage points that you earned for a stage are based on the total number of points available, which are multiplied by your stage percentage. So all that said, what it really comes down to is you only score and do as well as you hit. So obviously, shooting a major power factor means you can be slightly less accurate and still score the same or higher. This is to, as I've said many times before, level the playing field for those shooting 40 or 45 ACP, or for the people who really like to torture themselves 10 millimeter. And here's where the gamer part really enters. People who shoot a lot of USPSA or a lot of IDPA or shoot a lot frequently reload. They manufacture their own ammunition from components. Folks who do that or can do that can work the system and to work up a load that still makes major power factor, but is much softer shooting than a full power load. So power factor, and now we're going to actually go into the math behind it, is calculated by taking the weight of the bullet. For example, the traditional bullet weight for a 45 ACP round is 230 grains. So you take that weight of the bullet and multiply it by the actual muzzle velocity of the bullet out of your gun as it's measured by a chrono. So that's going to be in feet per second, and then dividing it by 1,000. So for example, a 200 grain bullet traveling at 700 feet per second would make a power factor of 140. So that's 200 times 700 divided by 1,000, which is minor. It's actually 15 points above where you need to be to make minor. Flip side would be a 230 grain bullet fired at right around 720 feet per second would score 165 or major, pretty much on the nose. Given these two loads, 2 Charlie hits would be worth 8 points for somebody shooting major, but only 6 points for somebody shooting minor. And it's in these areas that all those hits really add up across the stage, and it starts to make a really big difference. If you do it across a match, you end up in totally different ranges. So given this, an experienced shooter who really wants to work the system a little bit better, remember, power factor are floors, not ceilings. You can use the power factor and the ability to make your own bullets to their advantage. I load 200 grain 45 ACP rounds with somewhere right around 4.7 grains of powder and able to make major and have something that's much softer shooting and to bring back on target than something out of the box. Even the softest shooting white box that you can find has more snap and more felt recoil than my hand loads. Folks who are more advanced at hand loading than I am, I'm pretty new at it, have expressed to me that the best rule of thumb in terms of making ammo for competition is you want to be a little bit over the minimum threshold by about 5 power factor. So shooting 170 for major or 130 for minor. And the reason for this, if you're taking it to a area match or a national match, is that some chronographs are going to measure a little bit slower out of the muzzle than others. Also temperature, humidity, internal case volumes can slightly alter the velocity of a bullet out of the gun. And you don't want to find yourself bumped to another division where you'll be less competitive if you don't make power factor. Kind of the classic risk here is that you're shooting major, but your bullets only chrono out to minor. You end up getting bumped to minor with your 45 single stack. You're still shooting single stack, but you're shooting a hotter load, a heavier load, and you have less capacity in your magazine, so you have to reload more frequently versus somebody shooting 9mm single stack. The big risk here is if you're shooting a minor load and you come in below minor power factor, you're going to shoot the rest of the match. You're going to shoot all the match for no score. So if this is a major match and you're going for the top of the prize table, or you're going for a personal best and you end up chronoing below where you should, you end up getting screwed. It's a risk versus reward thing. I'm shooting for somewhere with my own loads at right about 170, as I said before, maybe a little bit higher, a little bit lower, just depending on what powder I'm using. I'm still trying to dial it in. The next thing we're going to talk about is yet another way to lose points in USPSA. And this is a way to lose points other than missing or shooting a new shoot or shooting deltas or charlies. And that's procedural penalties. A procedural, and you will get a lot of these when you shoot, happen when you make a procedural mistake in your conduct of a course of fire. These are going to be things like failing to engage a target, failing to follow through the course description, for example, missing a mandatory reload, engaging a target while having stepped over a fault line. These are all just mental mistakes that hurt you when you're not paying close enough attention or are going too fast. while there's definite physical elements to USPSA shooting, obviously we're running around with guns and kneeling and standing and leaning. USPSA is a very mental sport, so it's important to keep your head in the game and make sure you understand everything that's going on, but also that you're following the written stage briefing as closely as possible. I have an example. Talking about failing to take a mandatory reload. I was shooting a match last year, and the course of fire was from the start, engage these three targets, make a reload, move downrange, and engage 6 more targets. I started down, shot the 3 targets, bang, 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 proceeded downrange, and started to engage the rest of the targets without reloading. I got through most of those targets on the same magazine and realized my mistake, dropped the magazine, reloaded, shot the last 2, and followed the clearing commands, stuck the gun in the holster. They read me my time, and they told me 6 procedurals. The reason for 6 there was it was judged that because I didn't reload, I was at a significant competitive advantage versus somebody who followed the stage briefing, and that was correct. So I ended up losing 60 points for that really brief mental error that didn't actually add that much to my score in terms of the time I saved. However, it really, really, really hurt me because I stopped paying attention to 1 second and made a mistake that really took me out of the match. I scored dead last in that stage and in the bottom 2 or 3 in that match, which is significant. I'm not a top of the hub shooter by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm somewhere in the middle or in the kind of the bottom top of the bottom third, and I was not even close to there. So keep that in mind as you're shooting. So those are the kind of the key areas where we talk about score and how things work. We can now talk about stages, and this will actually factor in and include some of the stuff that we talked about before. There's a couple of different types of stages in USPSA that follow the same general rules, but have a few quirks. By and large, most courses of fire, also known as stages, are going to test your ability to move around a area while opening doors, looking through ports or windows, moving around barricades, and shooting at the targets all along. All field courses, those with a lot of movement, are scored by a standard called Comstock. Basically what this means is there's no fixed penalties for taking extra shots and engaging targets again if you miss them. You can shoot until you're happy with the hits. By and large, the best 2 hits on paper will score. So if you shoot at a target 4 times, have an Alpha, a Bravo, a Charlie, and a Delta, you'll end up with the 2 best, so the Alpha and the Bravo. That's just traditionally how USPSA is scored. There is important, this is something important to remember, there is always a time factor to your score. So taking those makeup shots, unless you really need to do so, is probably not your interest. If you can shoot a target, recognize that you have an Alpha and a Delta, and in a split second can take a follow-up shot that gets you another Alpha, it's worth it. If you're going to shoot twice, look at the target, think about it, and then take another shot because you didn't like one of your scoring hits, it's probably not going to be better for you to spend a second or 2 doing that versus just moving on to the next target and keep going. Also important to remember that any hits on a no-shoot target are going to earn you a penalty of -10. So if you're trying to squeeze something in there on an extra shot or don't have a great angle at it or the target's very obscured by a no-shoot, probably not a terrific idea to engage that target again. So that's Comstock, and that information about no-shoots is going to follow through in all of these. There's another type called of a course of fire called a speed shoot, where the shooter stays in one location and fires their course of fire. There's no movement involved. These can be scored Comstock, so you can take extra hits. But there's another type of scoring that's more common in a speed shoot called Virginia count. What Virginia count means is that you're limited in the number of rounds you can fire without penalty. For example, on the El Presidente drill, you're required to fire 6 shots and 6 shots only. 2 on target 1, 2 on target 2, 2 on target 3. You are assessed a penalty of down 10 points for any shots in excess of the stated rounds for the course of fire. In addition, if there's an extra hit on a target, you get another minus 10 on top of that. The example here is if you made up a shot that you thought was a miss, but was actually already a hit, you get 10 points down. For a new shooter like myself and like probably some of you out there, it's a good idea not to try to take the extra shots on a Virginia count stage because there's so much else going on. You're going to end up taking extra hits and extra shots. It's just not worth it. One of the things that makes a speed shoot special is that it can require one or more mandatory reloads. If you don't take the mandatory reload, a procedural error is assessed. So you lose 10 points for, and in this case, you lose 10 points for each shot fired after the failure to perform the required action. Virginia count stages are really designed to force the shooter to concentrate on accuracy and pay close attention to the written stage briefing. There's another type of course that you'll see from time to time. They're not very frequent. I've never encountered one in any of the matches I've shot. You'll see them at major matches or at matches where people like to get a little bit tricky, or they have a lot of technical capacity. These are called fixed time exercises or fixed time standards. Basically, there's a par time. You have a certain amount of time where you're trying to score as many hits as possible. Whenever there's a fixed time stage, there is no hit factor taken into account in the score sheets. Your actual points will always equal the stage points. So, that's just another quirk and another reason why you probably don't see them very active in a lot of the local matches. Finally, there's a final type of stage. They're called standard exercises. There's no fixed time. They don't have to be fixed time, but they can be. They can be Virginia count, and they're intended to test accuracy and speed. They're going to be things like standing in a box, engage target 1 and target 2 from the left side of the barricade, reload, and engage targets 3 and 4 from the right side of the barricade. They're not particularly complex, but there is a certain amount of accuracy and confidence that you need to carry out them well. And that's USPA scoring and stages in brief. Next time we talk about USPSA, we're going to do a walkthrough of what you can expect in your first match and some of the things that I've learned that are good to do or useful tools for me that I use to really help me go through the match and plan what I'm going to do on a stage and my approach. So thanks very much. Good luck with turkey season, and we will talk to you soon. Hey everyone, it's Andrew from Neophyte in the Woods. Just popping in real quick, wanting to do a quick kind of bumper out here. We here at Neophyte in the Woods and the Change Your POV Network do this all out of the goodness of our hearts. We legitimately love and are passionate about the subjects about which we speak. However, that doesn't mean that we're not absorbing some costs. And one of the ways we're trying to address the overhead costs associated with putting out these podcasts is to do Patreon. And you can find a link to it right down at the bottom in the kind of the episode show notes on our website. If you could donate anything that you're able to support us and help us get this content coming out to you, it would be very much appreciated. There are tiers of membership from $1 all the way up to $10, and you can donate more than that. For our backers, our Patreon patrons, we do offer some unique content. We've been doing weekly shows where we do a live stream and we talk about a quote on Mondays. It's normally right around 8 p.m. Eastern. There's also some other cool rewards, including the level at which I back at $10 a month. You can actually get, believe it or not, a signed autographed picture of our fearless leaders, Bennett and Eddie, It really changed my life. It sits actually right up above the computer where I record all this stuff. I take it with me when I go hunting. I take it with me when I go fishing. I take it with me when I go to work. It goes everywhere with me. Some people have an EDC pocket knife. I have an EDC picture of Ben and Eddie. I would really strongly suggest you back us and keep the good work that we're doing coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for leaving us reviews on iTunes. And we'll talk to you next week.